everyone, welcome to the 273rd episode of Just Shoot It, a podcast about filmmaking, screenwriting, and directing. Today's episode is brought to you by patrons Jamie Sadler, who I'm only mentioning because he keeps asking me to mention him, even though we've mentioned him so many times, but he is British, and I do believe that they get way more leeway than other people just because of their accent, even though he's just messaging me on Instagram, so I don't even hear his accent. But he uses like Britishisms.
Good
and
day,
also Mike,
Oren, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And also Mike Leonard, who has not harassed me in any way, but I do owe you a hat, Mike. And because of that, I'm going to mention you yet again. I'm Oren Kaplan.
And I'm Matt Enlow. I'm not nearly as susceptible to guilt or harassment, but I am here.
You mean you don't read your messages?
What? Today on the show, we've got Stu Pollard, the man behind Lunacy Productions, a production company.
One of the least crazy production companies you've ever heard of.
Yeah. Once in a blue moon, they make movies like Rust Creek, Plus One, The Short History of the Long Road, Freeland. Those first three we've all had filmmakers from, but they make a whole bunch of other movies as well. And Then I Go, which also Rebecca Green, previous guest, worked on. Anyway, we dig in with Stu. Besides being an awesome producer, Stu teaches a class on film financing that I took from Film Independent back in the day, and we've remained pals ever since. And I thought, let's have Stu on to talk about the nuts and bolts of getting your movie made. And it just so happens that they've also launched a new program called Lunacy U, which is an online course available for people all over the world to go ahead and learn the things that I learned from Stu about basically the ins and outs of writing a business plan. And so we invited him on the show to talk about it a little bit.
Yeah, Stu knows everything about making movies, especially indie ones, and knows quite a lot about the business of them. Turns out, apparently, that you should raise money for production and post-production before you start making your movie, according to Stu. So there's one mistake I've made in the past.
Yeah, so we really dig in. It's a great conversation. You know, Stu is a fountain of knowledge, so we really tried to ask as many questions as we possibly could from the perspective of you, the listener, as well as ourselves, just to kind of think through like what do these things mean, all of the different ins and outs of what a business plan is, how to find financiers, all of that stuff we dig into, why you should be making movies in the first place. So it's a really great conversation. I'm very excited. And if you are curious about learning more, you can always go to lunacyu.com.
Yeah, one of the least crazy URLs I've ever heard of. But before we talk to Stu, Matt and I were going to just chat for a moment about director's reels. The reason is past guest, George Edelman, and I were chatting. He is one of the guys that runs No Film School. And he was like, hey, Oren, you're the only person in the world that cares about director's reels. You want to write an article about it? And I said, of course. I want to spread my knowledge and give advice on director's reels to
And then you
the masses.
texted me. You texted me and you said, I'm working on this article about director's reels. And I wrote, why?
No, I will say what you actually responded is the article just telling people that they don't need to make a director's reel?
That is what I said, actually. Yeah, clearly just busting your chops a little bit, Oren, but I think there is an
I don't know if you're busting my chops, because you wrote, I'm genuinely being sincere about this question.
I did write that too, and I was sincere. Yeah. So okay. Well, we'll take a step back then. Oren, why do you think that a reel, and when we say a reel, we mean a montage, oftentimes cut to music, but not necessarily, of your previous work in a fun and entertaining way? Why do you think that a reel, like a trailer for your career, for your body of work, is a valuable tool for directors out there?
That's a great question. Well, first of all, I want to say that I believe it is a valuable tool for a certain type of director at a certain place in their career. So the David Finchers, or even the people that are regularly directing TV, Maggie Kiley, some of our previous guests that have directed like 1 million TV shows. I don't know that Maggie benefits a lot from putting a scene from American Horror Story and then putting a scene from Scream Queens and then another show on her reel, because people can just look at her IMDb and there's a certain level of legitimacy just from seeing the credits. You literally have to have seen none of her work to know that she is a good director, right? Mm-hmm. And that she's at a level that you might consider hiring her. There are other directors that have made like 3 short films at film school and that's it. And I don't think they're quite at a place where a reel makes sense either, because a reel should kind of represent your body of work and who you are as a director and who you want to be as a director. And B, it should really only contain your very best stuff. And if you haven't made a ton of stuff, then it's hard to show your best stuff. But I write about this in the article. I do think what the reel is, in my opinion, is your point of view on your work as a director that you are proud of and the type of director that you want to be. So what I mean by that is maybe you made a commercial, maybe you made a short film, maybe, right, you made that short film, A Gray One, kind of recently. How long is that short?
It's like 12 minutes.
12 minutes,
maybe
right?
a little less.
So if you want to show someone a breadth of your work, because, hey, we want you to meet with Matt. He's this comedy director. He's done a lot of great things, blah, blah, blah. Here, watch some of his stuff. Like, you don't want to give them 4 12-minute shorts, right? That's 48 minutes worth of stuff to watch. And maybe A Gray One, maybe there's some good scenes and there's some great scenes. And maybe there's a really funny moment. You know, you happen to have a trailer for A Gray One. So that's actually what you chose to do instead of making a reel to include it. You've given a preview of the tone, of the style, of the production quality, of the casting, of all those things that comprise of you as a director in a trailer to a short. I think a lot of people do not have a trailer for their short films. So I think a reel, for me, I've directed so many commercials that I don't love, but there's something in them that I really like. Like this dog does something funny, or I have an actor that I really love that does something great, or, you know, this commercial was actually never released and we never did a proper color and sound mix on it, but I think there's 4 shots in it that are great. I have this Converse spot on my website with Pete Davidson. It was never released. It was never finished. We never went through color, never went through sound.
You're probably technically not supposed to have it on your website.
Yeah,
I bet. I didn't see. So yeah, everyone, no, just ignore this part of the conversation if you are litigious.
But honestly, that is a big part of what's cool about a reel. Is right. It's not a commercial product, so at least as far as I'm concerned, I can use any copywritten piece of music in my reel. You know, I can take a commercial and that I thought would be so much better if we had some Led Zeppelin song in it, but we never could. I'm going to put the Led Zeppelin song. Like, I can take...
Devil's advocate, actually. Do you remember a couple years ago, a bunch of directors were so mad because Vimeo did a DMCA purge, basically? Do you remember this?
I don't remember that.
Like
I know you...
3 or 4 years ago, basically everybody had all of their stuff on... Most directors use Vimeo as like their
portfolio
archive or portfolio. So they had all sorts of different commercials and music videos, anything that they had directed, all of which is copyrighted. And you are not the copyright owner. And so a bunch of people's stuff got taken down. And so you just all over Twitter, every director I knew was like, oh my God, I can't believe this was the only copy I had of this spot. And it's gone, and people were pretty upset.
Did they undo that? Because I have so much copyright music on there.
No, they just did it in one big sweep, and then, you know, who knows? It's we're just sitting on a time bomb. All of which is to say, you could have done that either way. You don't own the rights to the work that you have,
right? With
the exception of if you did a short film or something.
YouTube is pretty strict about that DMCA copyright stuff, but I use Vimeo, like you mentioned, and I don't make my videos public. They're private. You have to have the link, but you can still embed them on your own website.
That's what people were mad about. Is that's what everybody does, and they got wiped.
Oh, okay. Well, I luckily have a copy of all my stuff in case it does get wiped.
You've got a hard drive in your backpack.
Yeah,
Oren.
5 terabytes. Lacy rugged. Anyway, so I do think, and again, I've been thinking a lot about this today, that your reel is, hey, here's my personality. I'm going to show you the stuff that I've made that I really love. And sometimes I'm even going to tell you why I'm showing it to you and why it's good. Like my reel, I narrate my reel and I more or less explain why every single piece of footage is on there. And I try to make it fun and light and quick. And I do mostly comedy. So there's kind of, you know, a comedic bent to it. There's a point of view. You know, another director that we said who had an amazing reel is Tim Wilkheim, whose reel is just hilarious, and he's really good at that kind of deadpan comedy. And his reel is, the way he formed it is a deadpan comedy reel, and he managed to get a lot of celebrities in there without showing an entire short film with, you know, James Corden in it. He can show us 5 seconds of this person, 4 seconds of this. He has, you know, he's had Short of the Week multiple times. He's had stuff in South by Southwest. How can you show people all those things in 1 minute? And to me, that's the reel. Somebody,
it's an entertaining an entertaining resume, effectively.
yeah, and
right,
and even Seth Worley
and a cover letter, right?
Yeah. So Seth Worley, past guest, I'd even consider him a friend at this point. I hope that's not
but
TMI.
He wouldn't.
He for sure would not.
Yeah, he's been texting about it.
But he recommended
like,
Valentina V's reel. Did you? I don't know if you saw his recommendation or if you've
seen it. I have
seen
that one. Yes. Yes, I have.
So it opens up with, The Rock and is it Jason Statham? And her audio directing them to look in a certain direction. And that's, I think her point of view on things is not only am I going to make cool stuff, but I'm going to include you in how I'm making it. I really enjoy the puzzle of filmmaking, and I'm going to include you on that journey. And that's why she makes, she's does stuff for Aperture Lighting. She does stuff for all these different camera companies.
Very front and center.
Yeah,
totally. We should have her on the show.
We should. But at the same time that she does that, she still makes good stuff, on her own, commercial things and things on her own. So I think for someone like her, who's also a cinematographer, by the way, she can say, hey, here's some stuff I shot. Here's some stuff I directed. Here's a glimpse of me in 2 minutes. So I think someone like her, someone like me, someone like Tim, I think there's a value in having a reel when you can only get someone's attention for 2 minutes and you want to tell them hey, this isn't the first thing I've ever made. I've actually worked with 1 million people. I've worked with 1 million brands, and you can trust me. And also I have a perspective on who I am and what work I do.
Mm-hmm. And the self-awareness. Yeah, no, I think all of that's great. And I do genuinely think that there's a lot of value, even just in the act of formulating what that perspective is. Just formally saying, hey, this is what I do and this is what I'm good at, I think is really interesting. So backing up a little bit, because like I said, I know I was just kind of giving you a hard time. I think that
that's what your reel should be. It's just you giving people a hard time.
Yeah. I come from a long line of teasers, actually. It's true. It's how I express love. I don't know what's wrong with me. Anyway, so I think that there is kind of this cool kid mentality, cool kid perspective that we were talking about a little bit offline, that I think does sort of plague the idea of what a reel is. And I think you've done a really great job of explaining what makes them special and unique and interesting. And this mentality that I'm referring to, I think is bred out of a few things. One of which is the misunderstanding that a reel is to get you work from production companies and agencies. Right? You're not saying that your commercial reps send that specific clip when they're pitching you for a commercial necessarily, right? Most of the time, 90% of the time, it's it's a flavor piece maybe they put somewhere in there depending on what the tone of the spot is.
Yeah, I'd
Would you say that's accurate?
I would say it's almost never been sent, unless some companies I work with, I say to them, hey, can you please send this reel? It's gotten me.
It works.
It works. Yeah. Right. I've been on commercial sets where I got the job unrelated to the reel, and then people checked out my website and they saw the reel and they said, oh, hey, by the way, we really loved your reel. It was clever, whatever whatever word they use. So to me, it's if the feedback is always positive, even from commercial agency type folks, why are we not sending it? And I think the answer is because there's a context in commercial reels where you want to just see 3 commercials that are related to the commercial you're pitching on. And also my reel personally, because I'm lazy like everyone, is I try to make a reel that just is a catch-all for all things. So it has features, it has TV, it has commercials, it has shorts, it has web videos, it has me in it, just webcam, stuff. So it's if only 25% of it applies to commercials, why would you show it to when you're pitching on a commercial? Because you're wasting their time with 75% of that reel.
And sometimes it works that it is cool that Oren's made features. So plenty of agency people love movies, right?
Yeah. I've seen directors that have a Sundance short and a trailer for a feature they made, and they get commercial jobs off of those two.
Yeah. Actually, the company I'm with currently, part of that model is it's cool to make other stuff. Most of the directors on that roster don't have a huge amount of commercial work, even though it's a commercial production company. It's like, no, they've got Sundance features and stuff. Like they've got movies you actually watch, which is fun and cool. But going back to this mentality, separate from the idea of whether or not it gets you work, I think that some of it comes from this thing that basically when you're young and you're starting out, and I am a perfect example of this, I put together a reel that had a couple student shorts on it, maybe the one or two good looking shots from that short, and like a few shots that were just practice, me kind of trying to figure out an animation technique, or I had an idea for something that never even finished. And you can feel it stretching. You can tell that someone is filling things in, and like maybe the director is like hoping that no one's going to notice that obviously it's really just student work, or I haven't made enough to really amount to a professional body of work yet. And I'm trying to fool people, right? We've all been in a version of that. And then slowly, as your work becomes more professional and you work more, that reel gets better and better and better. And then all of a sudden, it makes more sense to start sending people examples that are closer to what they're specifically looking for. And then at a certain point, you end up in that Maggie Kiley camp where people have just heard of your work, right? And so there is that thing of like the director in the middle that maybe aspirationally wants to be in the more successful camp and can kind of, and I maybe would put myself in this, maybe there's a part of me that's like, oh, well, I'm big enough that I don't have to cut a reel together anymore because I have enough work. I have a body of work and I can send people trailers to my long form stuff and just the actual spots of my short form stuff. I wonder, that might be some of the psychology of like the different people that we've talked to and how they feel about that stuff. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I also think it's just really hard to make a good reel. There's two
super hard
of the main issues I see with reels are that either they are 10 scenes slapped back to back with almost no context as to why you're showing me this scene. And people think they need to choose the most emotional scene they've ever shot, couple fighting, someone crying, someone blowing.
Let me ask you, Oren.
Yeah.
Do you think that you like reels because you're good at them, or are you good at them because you like them?
I don't think I'm good at them, and I don't think I like them, but I think I have a ton of opinions. I think I've seen, and largely because of this podcast, so many bad reels and average reels. And I do feel like, this is going to sound like such a dick thing to say, but I feel like part of my mission in this podcast is to help people see their own work in the way that other people see it. Is to get out of your own shoes and have someone else's perspective. And so to me, when I see a reel that has cliche things on it, has things I've seen before, that has no context, that is boring to me, I just want to say like, dude, why are you showing me this? Like, I don't know why you're showing me this. You have one chance to show me something that should be awesome. And by the way, I've seen great reels. Daniel Hurwitz, I found his reel. I showed it to you. We talked to him about it. Like, there are reels that really catch my eye, and I'm excited to learn more about these people.
That don't just have a hook or a gimmick or a meta idea of some sort, right? Like, I think that there's probably people at home who are like, okay, well, they see Tim's reel, and they're like, fuck, that idea is so good. And then they see your reel and they're like, oh man, well, that riff is really interesting. I love that. And then they see Valentina's reel and they're like, well, dang, I don't have footage of The Rock saying that I rock.
Right.
And so the idea of just like, okay, well, just doing like picking a cool song and then putting your best shots in order to it is complicated, or is
right. Well,
intimidating.
That's what I was going to say is the other problem in a reel. It's people either slap these scenes back to back, or they take all their best shots from all the things they've ever made and they cut them to the beat of some song. And usually it's like an artsy fartsy song. And in that version, it's more of a cinematography reel. And as a director, I don't really need you to show me how beautiful your shots are. I want to see how you can control pacing, mood, emotion, storytelling, characters. And that is really hard to do fast. So if you can do it, then I think it's something worth talking about. And if you can't do it, then you probably shouldn't have a reel, which is, I think, what you're alluding to in a way.
Kind of what I'm getting at. Yeah, exactly.
That's on the low end. On the high end, you don't want to say, hey, look at all these famous people I've worked with, because you're at a level where you don't need to brag about that, right? Like there is something cringeworthy, like kind of the name dropping of things where you're like just telling people like, I swear I'm like a legitimate person. You should hire me. Look at all the stuff I've made. So there is a fine balance between those things, but I think it's fun, and I think we know that the only audience isn't Hollywood executives and agents and managers.
Well, and I think that's the big thing, is that I think a reel can be for all sorts of different types of people who aren't jaded. Right.
Yes.
I think that's maybe who it's best for, frankly.
Yeah.
You know,
I've done that. I've posted stuff on my Facebook page, and I'll have someone from high school that doesn't work in the film industry reach out and say, hey, I'm working for this startup in Silicon Valley, and I know the marketing department is looking to make some videos. Can I put them in touch with you? Maybe it's not a Pepsi commercial for the Super Bowl, but it could be cool. Sometimes those Silicon Valley commercials give you a lot of leeway, a lot of freedom, and a lot of money to do whatever you want. So it's a thing, and especially if you have any off time, it's kind of good for like your ego to remind yourself, like, hey, here's all these things I made that I'm proud of. So I don't know. I like reels. I get that they're really hard. You had mentioned that like having a website with just like links to all your things is great as well, and I do agree that that's also good. But I have a lot of thoughts on reels. If you want to hear more of them, then either send me a message on Instagram or on Twitter, and when the article comes out, I will send it to you. I'll send you a link.
Did we ever talk about on the show that dude who ripped your reel off?
No, but I linked to his reel in my article.
Oh, dang!
In my list of great reels.
Dude. So just for people who haven't seen Oren's reel, it's a meta commentary on what a good director's reel is. It's got voiceover. He kind of enumerates all of the different things that make a reel good. Like, oh, is it interesting to have celebrities that you've worked with? What about fun dogs? That's literally
don't
in
forget
Oren's
to put
voice.
all the logos of the brands you've done stuff for.
So like I said, it's a meta commentary on what a reel is, narrated by and starring Oren with his footage. And so Oren, about a year ago, sends me a link to a dude who has full-on cribbed this idea. Just like stolen most of the script. He's tweaked a little bit of it, but it is very clearly stolen. And I don't use that word lightly, because I think that,
Pirated.
No, I'm happy to call it stolen. This is people being creative, remixing things, rethinking things, reimagining things. I'm 100% open to. And so when someone steals someone's idea outright like this, and it is that cut and dried, I actually think it's quite abhorrent. So, I'm going to say that on your behalf. You don't have to comment on it. But anyway, the point is,
I was flattered. It was this guy. I'm pretty sure he was in India. It's his voice, but he's saying exactly what I say. Your
exact script.
My exact.
With a few tweaks. Sometimes the jokes are stronger. Sometimes they're not.
I don't know about that. But the craziest thing is that his footage isn't bad. He's worked on a lot of things.
Here's my problem. He thinks he got away with it. He did get away with it. It's not like, like anyone he's sending his reel to, they're going, oh, wow, that's pretty clever. The same way that people are doing that to your reel. And that does get under my skin, actually. You don't own meta reels. You know what I mean? But if someone steals the script, transcribes your script, and then tweaks it to make it their own in minor ways, that's not cool. That's not cool.
Yeah, I guess the only way it would bother me is if he started beating me out for jobs, But in general, I think it's weird. I think it's weird. I'll admit that. But I think it's kind of cool that someone liked my reel so much that they copied it verbatim.
Did I ever tell you? I probably haven't told you this. I haven't told many people this. A Squaresville fan a few years ago sent me a link to a story that was basically a transcript of the pilot episode of Squaresville, my web series.
Oh, really?
And they had won a college scholarship as a result of it. But here's the thing: they tweaked it so that it was written from the point of view of the dead protagonist. No one dies in Squaresville, but their twist was they killed one of the main characters and then had them narrate everything.
And it was called Coffinsville.
I should find it. And I didn't say anything, but so like the person was like, "Yo, this is messed up. This is definitely your show." But I was like, "Well, I'm not gonna like rat out this plagiarist because it would cost them their college education."
Yeah, I mean, I do believe that like the plagiarizers of this world ultimately get what's coming for them. Like there's a limit as to how far you can get with plagiarism. Anyhow, don't forget, I'm at OKaplan on Instagram.
That's right. And I am OKaplan.
And I'm at Smitey Pyleg at Twitter, and I'm OKaplan on Facebook. And just send me a message, and when the article comes out, I will send it to you, and it will teach you how to make a director's reel that doesn't suck.
Yeah, there you go.
Though sometimes the answer is to just not make the reel.
Just not make it. Well, we'll see. I'll read the article. Maybe I'll cut one. I probably won't.
You won't. Last thing before we talk to Stu, I want to remind people we do have a Patreon. It's patreon.com/justshootitpod. Patreon is a place you can support the podcast if you feel like you get anything out of it. You can give us $1 a month, $2, $10. We'll get you a Just Shoot It podcast hat. I'm going to mail Mike Leonard his hat. Not tomorrow because I'm going to Disneyland, but on Thursday. And you can have your hat too. So patreon.com/justshootitpod. We love all of our patrons. Just a little bit more than the rest of the listeners. So
yeah,
most of what you get in return is love. Just so you know.
and a hat and getting your name at the top of an episode is legitimately cool. So
yeah, I wonder if there's people that like join our Patreon and then just stop listening. And they never cash out on that, hearing their name.
I do worry that they're going to miss them hearing our names, or us saying their names.
We should email people when we mention their names. That would be pretty sweaty. Thirsty?
Yeah.
Sweaty? Desperate?
Yeah, I both are probably accurate, but yeah, I hear what you're saying. But I don't think that's true. I think it's actually more work is the real problem. And,
we hate work.
Yeah.
That's why we just talk instead of
that's right.
work. Okay, speaking of talking, let's see what Stu Pollard is up to. We're here with Stu Pollard. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
My pleasure, gentlemen. Thank you for having me.
Matt has only said good things, which is usually a bad sign.
I mean, it is true, not to kiss butt, but like I took Stu's class a couple years ago now on film financing at Film Independent, and now I have a movie
with distribution.
Those are true facts. Yeah,
I was going to say we'll be soliciting a testimonial from you shortly. Now that you're mixed. So
yeah. So Stu, tell us. I know Matt has told me a lot about what you do, but can you tell our audience how you would define your role in the film industry?
Challenging question. I guess the simplest definition is producer. And I've been doing that for about 20 years now in some way, shape, or form, maybe a little bit longer than that. I think the first thing we shot, which I also directed, was in 98. But every single project, with very rare exception, we've made more or less the same way in terms of the financial architecture to it, which is what we'll talk some more about tonight. But the last 7 years, I guess, 6 years now, I've been running a company. You could call it a film fund. You could call it a production company. It's sort of a hybrid of those two. But I basically got out of the business for a while because I got demoralized. And then I taught for a while, which was actually the suggestion of one of my investors, which was great advice. And that kind of got my batteries recharged. So we started the current iteration of Lunacy back in 2015, after about 2 years of raising money. And what we've done in the last 6 years is invest in certain projects. We financed one of our own. We're developing like crazy, especially right now. And even in the spirit of trying to stay afloat, we're sort of doing some tangential initiatives, including the education thing.
That's awesome. I mean, to me, the most interesting part about that is the realization that most film education in America is composed of demoralized filmmakers.
I don't know that I would draw that generalization.
I would 100% would. Yeah, without a doubt.
Every lesson. Why not to do this?
Speaking, Stu, can you put in a good word at USC for me, buddy?
I would, but the ironic thing about SC, where I was supposed to teach a class last summer and that got phased out, but I taught there for, I think, 8 years, and they're very big on, and this I totally support. They want a lot, especially their adjunct faculty, which there are a lot of. I don't know if that makes them unique in the film school environment, but I taught for the better part of 8 years, having experience that was pretty dated. And about then, in the middle of my teaching, we got this company launched, which was in no small part inspired by the kids I was teaching. So that's what I mean when I got my batteries recharged. But then we went out and made this movie called Rust Creek, was shot at the end of 16 and in the beginning of 17. The last semester I taught was the end of 16. So the irony is I think I hired 30 different kids from SC. I shouldn't say kids because some of them were people that were my contemporaries, including the director and the producers. But I think 15 of my former students contributed in some meaningful capacity. Our visual effects supervisor was a former student. A lot of PAs obviously were as well. But then it was like, it's like being a studio musician in LA. As soon as you take a week's vacation, somebody else steps into that adjunct seat. So I've not really taught in a meaningful capacity at SC in about 4 years now, outside of the summer class and a couple of other kind of one-offs. And I miss it, but I also don't know that I've got the bandwidth for it. And again, that the irony is now I've got all this relevant experience to teach from, but SC is a tough nut to crack. And they made a real, I don't mean to go on and on, but they needed to make a real push to diversify their faculty, because there were people still teaching there from when I was a student and still are, who are great instructors, but the student body makeup is now much different in 2015, 2020 than it was in 1995.
Right. They're like, you just cut the film with the blade.
I mean,
that's all we know. Editing.
I'd love to go down that path, but
I think there's one international student in my what was my 507, my intro to film class at SC in the fall of 92, out of 18 kids. In the most recent class I taught, I guarantee you half of them were from halfway around the world. And more than half of them were women. So, and those are fantastic changes to see. Just the faculty needed to play a little bit of catch up, in my humble opinion, as a straight white dude.
Well, nowadays, if you want to learn from experienced filmmakers, instead of going to USC, you just listen to Just Shoot It.
Just Shoot It. There you go.
Just shoot it, or go to lunacu.com.
Hey, there you go.
We're shamelessly plugging our initiatives.
But before we go on, it's worth plugging, actually, speaking of plugging ourselves, Rust Creek, we talked with Jen McGowan. You can dig into our archives, and there's also a few other lunacy projects as well, I realized. Plus one, we had Jeffy and Andrew on The Short History of the Long Road. But all of those films are lunacy films, I realized, and we had their filmmakers on, so we'll have the links to those episodes in our show notes.
Yeah, and all fantastic people behind those projects. Jen's a force of nature, of course, who we couldn't have made Rust Creek without, and gosh, Jeff and Andrew are just on fire. I think they've gotten like 5 or 6 things set up since that came out, and it just premiered like it's Tribeca 21 that premiered 2 years ago. So they good for them. They're super nice guys and wildly talented. So
yeah, and great podcast interviewers.
Yeah, I think we've heard enough about their success. Can we move on to talk about our attempt at success, please? Thank you.
There you go.
Okay, so and you've worked primarily in features, right?
Yeah, almost exclusively. We've done over the years a little bit of sort of webisodic content and a couple of commercials that were mainly favors for friends, but yes, almost exclusively features. And almost, I think the cheapest one we've worked on was $50K, and the most expensive one I've done is in the neighborhood of 3, maybe not quite 3. I didn't run the budget
3,
on that, so 3 million.
3 million. There you go.
So $50K on the low end, 3 million on the high end.
Right. So I thought maybe we could run a few different scenarios by you, just to kind of address the questions of people at various stages in their career that possibly listen to this podcast. And so my first question is, I'm a new filmmaker. I do not live in LA. I've never made a feature film before. Let's say I just finished film school, but not at USC or UCLA or AFI, somewhere in the middle of the country.
Where they clearly racked up less debt. So they're already off to a good start. Yeah.
Yeah. I have a few different scripts. I have a genre thing. I have a rom-com. What kind of advice can you give people about their first project and figuring out what the budget should be and how to get it financed?
Let's even say they've got that shoebox of a few different ideas, right? And they're trying to pick which is the one that I'm going to develop.
That has the highest chance.
Highest chance, best chance. Yeah.
So I will probably steer a lot into Pollyanna territory. And it's not just because I'm nursing a bourbon here, but I firmly believe that especially if you're going to go via the independent hustle, and because it's kind of a bifurcated question. It's like, which project do I think I might get the most traction with in the industry from a script and meeting standpoint versus which one should I make because a lot of people I don't think are dissimilar from me in that you get into independent filmmaking regardless of your experience level or age because you're just like, I want to frigging make something. And so you just become that unstoppable force and plow forward as opposed to playing the development game. We have a larger project now that I hope it will get made. It's clearly the best script we've ever had, but it's a $10 million movie. And so that's not going to be something we go out and talk to dentists about financing. But back to your question, the point I was trying to make is I think if you want to make something, it needs to be, honestly, this is the Pollyanna part, what you feel strongest in your heart, you really want to make. That you think you're capable of doing something great with because you desperately want to make this. And I think that core passion, I don't want to underestimate the value of that because it's you all know it's so hard to get things made, let alone financed. If you don't have that drive, if you don't have that belief in like, gosh, I really need to make this. This is why I'm on the planet. That is, if I had multiple projects to choose from, that's the one I'd pick. I wouldn't say like, let's go make the horror one because the horror market is
fair
hot.
enough. But just to push back a tiny bit, Stu.
Please.
Got, assume that every single person listening is incredibly passionate and equally brilliant. And they all have a different script. Like every single person's driving along and they're like, Stu's talking about me, right?
Sure.
Are there, you're still in the business of placing bets on filmmakers, right?
Yeah.
That's what development is, right? So assume that everyone's a genius. Assume that everyone is ride or die committed. Are there any other things that would sway you one way or the other, right? You read great scripts all the time.
And
right?
we read a lot of really crappy ones too. But
sure.
But
those people don't listen to the podcast.
Right. Of course. And I don't mind the term pushback on my answer, except I feel like that's a different question. Because the reason I say go with what you love is because one word to the less experienced of it, one word advice, less experience I would give is if you've got like 4 ideas you think are really good, don't email someone like me or you guys or an agent with 4 different ideas because everybody's got a stack of stuff to read. Everybody's busy. So that's why you lead with the thing you feel strongest about. Now, your question is, if there's 10 different filmmakers who already have made that choice, already have the passion project they think is brilliant, then you're right. It's a bunch of different variables. We got to like the material. So if we're talking about a writer-director, we want to respond to the script. We also don't want to, because we read so much unsolicited material, we ask people to sign a release form. That's actually a litmus test for us too, because people push back on signing a release and don't get that any producer who's worth their salt is going to ask you to do that to protect their own liability. It's not about stealing ideas. It's about like, if you want to send me a golf movie and I've got a big scene with a golf or a romantic comedy with a golf scene in it, I don't want you saying down the road that I stole your scene when I've been developing the script for 10 years and I just met you 10 minutes ago. So point being is we have to respond to the material. Don't be, if you've never signed a release form before, don't be scared about signing them, especially if the producer or company you're sending it to has any kind of track record, because they're not in business to screw people. They're in business to find new talent. And then, if the material's solid and we get a meeting with somebody, obviously it's a little bit like dating in that respect, but from a professional perspective, which is, do we make a connection? Do we see the material the same way they do? Especially for lower budgeted projects, it's like, if it's a writer director, are they bringing any help with the financing to the table? If it's their first movie and they're like, nobody knows who the hell they are.
When you say any help, do you mean money? Is that
not necessarily money, but like, are they willing to go out on pitch meetings with us? Are they at all connected? Because if they never made anything before, they may have never asked people for money before, and obviously no one wants to spend their own money, at least at first, before you realize the realities involved. But if we are going to invest in you, then it would be nice if you would help with that, right? Or at least be open to it. It's not a deal breaker, but it is a deal breaker if there's no sort of genuine connection, both creatively and sort of entrepreneurially, with a writer director. And this is strictly going the independent route. So we met with a writer director team, I think about 3 years ago. I will not name names. This movie went on to get made and apparently is very good. But when we met with them, they were very hard-headed. They demanded final cut. I don't think they ended up with that with the company that made it. But again, I'm not going to cast any dispersions. But we ended up walking away from that deal, even though we loved the script, because we did not feel like we could get along with them. And these were kids in their 20s. My director of development's in his 40s. I'm in my 50s. We weren't going to tell them what movie to make, but we did want them to trust us that if they started getting in their own way, that's where our experience would be valuable. So some of it's material, obviously. And if you look at it, I'm a big sports fan, so I sometimes compare things to the NCAA tournament. The round one game is the material. The round two game is, do we see eye to eye? We think we could, because it's making a film is a long-term partnership relationship. The Sweet 16 game, beyond that is hopefully getting closer to production and getting financed. But we have to like the people involved. When we started the company 6 years ago, people asked us what genre, what was our kind of mandate, and the main thing we said was no assholes, because it's that life's just too short. And if you're in your 20s or your teens and you've never made anything before with other people, then maybe you haven't had that negative experience. But once you've worked with somebody who's a jerk, it's like, this is too hard. Like, why would a personality make it harder? So hopefully that answers your question a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think my question, Matt kind of skipped us to like what you look for in the movie, but I guess just to back up to more what I was asking is, do you think as a first-time filmmaker, you should think about marketability at all when you are coming up with a concept?
Totally. And when I say it's like the project you feel the strongest about and that you love the most, that's, I'm seeking somebody who's not going to give up, right? Who's not going to leave when the picture wraps, who's not going to be, if it doesn't turn out perfectly, isn't going to abandon it. Because I can't do that as a producer, right? At that point, I'm on the hook for it. But no one should think their life story is the best story ever, unless you've either done something really tremendous or terrible. And you never want to make them go out and make something where it's only going to appeal to your friends and family. So, yeah, I think you have to think about marketability. I always, when the class starts that I teach, I say you have to be convinced you're going to make something great. So look, even if that is your life story, you have to have this almost madman, like you have to convince yourself of that in a sort of madman way, that you're going to make something brilliant. Very few of us ever achieve that. But if you don't start with that objective, you're going to catch the coffee table square, as opposed to the moon.
I wonder if there are filmmakers that were like, yeah, I thought this idea was like kind of cool, so I made it. I didn't know like if it was that good, and then we won Sundance, and now I'm directing a Marvel movie.
Yeah, I am certain that there are exceptions to every rule. I just think the person who's like, let's go make a movie and see what happens. Those are the people who probably don't have an appreciate. Either they've made so many films that they just go out and crank them out, or they haven't been through the pitfalls and apexes, if you will, of what it's like to make a feature on a limited budget. Because it's fun, it's amazing. There's arguably very few things out there as rewarding when you pull it off, but when you're in the thick of it, it's every day's a bunch of ups and downs.
It's kind of all-consuming. So would you say, okay, so you've decided what project, you are super passionate about it, you feel like there's an audience out there, you think it's marketable in a way, and you want to really make it because you've sent, the script out to 1 million people off some list you bought online of people in Hollywood and no one responded. How do you figure out how much money you should spend on your first feature?
Okay, so great question. And I'm very bullish on this, and I'm somebody who back when I was in film school, I became known as the guy who budgeted and scheduled all the thesis films. Like I was in demand. That's obviously doesn't mean tiddly poo, but just because like even I go out and hire professional people to do budgets and schedules for me who do that for a living, who have and we don't usually hire the same people to do two projects in a row because we want somebody who's got experience shooting in that state under that incentive or under this budget level or with this genre if there's tons of stunts. And you get an experienced enough UPM or first AD, which are the two positions that are most qualified to do budgets and schedules for you. And they probably have worked under multiple circumstances. So, but
And
if you're young,
you would not go for a line producer, UPM or first AD is kind of, or is that the same thing?
I would define them as the same way. So yeah, line producer, UPM, first AD, even a good second AD can probably pull it off because most of them aspire to be firsts. But I definitely think that's some of the best money you can possibly spend is acknowledging, unless you're trying to do something for $5,000, in which case budgets kind of go out the window, or maybe even at $50,000 they kind of go out the window because so much stuff's going to be donated.
Right.
But if
and
you're
can
going
you like what's the range of what you would pay, a line producer UPM to budget a script?
So that's also a great question, and I probably need to update my teaching slides on this because I used to say you could find somebody for like, $1,500 to $2,500 to do it, and you probably can if you're willing to.
I was just talking to a pal and listener who was quoted. I could pull up the text, but I think he had three different people who said one said 500, one said 1,500, and one said 2,500. And I think he's going Mama Bear. I think it's right in the middle.
No, we just paid somebody. It was either $4,000 or $4,500. I have to go back and look, which is the most I've ever paid. Now, this is that $10 million movie I'm talking about that was full union. I've never done a show full IA, full DGA. I've done movies that have dipped their toes in that water, but never as the lead producer. So I really wanted somebody who was going to ask all the right questions. So we pulled somebody out of who works in a ton of very high level projects, has indie experience, but also studio experience and TV experience. And so I felt it was worth that premium. But I was even surprised when I went out and the first two quotes I got were like I think $4,000 and $4,500. It was like, oh, inflation.
Sure.
So
yeah.
Or you're just paying that more for people that you really want.
And production is back. So like everyone is trying to like get those budgets in order.
I agree. That's part of it too. Two of the people I went to couldn't even give me a price because they were already on sets.
While we're on the topic of budgets, actually, and jumping all over the place a little bit, at what point do filmmakers need to go ahead and get their budget made? Right, like say they've got a script. Maybe they're going to talk to they've got a few people that they want to talk to. Do they do that before they talk to a production company? Before they talk to salespeople? Any of that stuff? Like, at what point is it the right time to pull a favor and get your friend to put together a budget for you?
I'll say this with the understanding that most people probably get this, but certainly the first thing you have to be sure of, especially before you're going to drop the $2,000 or the $4,000 or whatever the heck it's going to be. And I will say this with the caveat that, like, if you hire somebody to do it, make sure that you negotiate this in advance. Get the breakdown, get the schedule, and get the budget. Because the budget's debatable. You could debate whether or not the budget's accurate if they don't do that work. Because that's what generates the numbers. And the other thing is make sure you get the files when you're done, because the time that may lapse between when the budget is done and when the movie gets made, that could be a long time. So you may need to go back and do tweaks. That person who did it's going to be long gone. So if all you have is a PDF of what they handed you, and that may mean you have to shop around to a couple of mama bears because some people are like, oh, you can't see my movie magic templates because of all my magic tricks that are in there. I found that also can sometimes be an excuse for really sloppy work. So you want to make sure, check references like anything when you hire somebody. But assuming the script is right, and I say that because I remember at some point long after I'd made, I think, 2 features, I thought the script was ready to go when I sent it to a friend of mine who was a UPM who did budget it for me as a favor or cut her rate significantly. And she wrote me back. She's like, I'm going to do this, but this thing, there's no way this thing's ready. And I was like, it's ready. And that product has yet to shoot. So I think she was right. But I think your question, Matt, is specifically like where, assuming the script's ready, when do you need to know that number pretty confidently when you're going
Or
out?
even if you think the script is ready, but like,
Yeah, I think it's pretty early,
I mean,
because
if you want to make the movie, you need to
know
how
what it's
much
going
it's
to
going to
cost.
cost.
Yeah, and especially if you're going to go the indie route financing wise, because this circles back to why would you hire somebody to do it for you? Because you want somebody who's objective. You start doing things yourself, and it's like, the contingency works at 2%, not 10.
Right.
And
Like my mom will make food for everyone.
You just took the words right out of my mouth. It's like all these things that actually have value, you think you're going to hustle for, but that shouldn't be what your budget reflects. That certainly doesn't create a sustainable model long term. But certainly in the eyes of what the investor might look at, you want to present to them as transparent a picture as possible as to what this thing's going to cost. So I like doing it. I'd say before you want to get around to raising money, you should have a script, a budget, a lawyer, and a list. And
A lawyer too? God. Hold on, let me write this down. Okay.
But so the budget's the second thing on the list.
So something we've probably heard a lot, and I'm sure even ourselves said a lot, is like, if we could get Seth Rogen in the movie, we'll make it for $5 million. But if not, then, we could probably make it for like $350 with non-actors. Like, is that a real thing that has ever actually happened to an indie filmmaker?
Look, every single thing out there that you can imagine, I'm sure has happened, especially with the explosion that's happened the last 15 years of just the sheer number of titles getting made. But I think you have to prepare for that contingency, and that's one of the things I get asked most often is like, look, I have a $1 million, a $500,000, and a 250 version of this script, but it circles back to like the big star thing happening. I think, look, you could raise the $1 million for your sort of A+ version of the film, and then suddenly at the 11th hour, an actor gets a hold of it for whatever reason or sheer chance, and that changes the nature of the project. Maybe it makes it a studio project, and you just give all the private equity that you've raised back because it becomes a $10 million movie. So I think that scenario is one you can always be hopeful for as long as you're realistic.
Have you heard of that happening?
Not personally, no.
The Palm Springs guys actually is like the only real world version of that story.
But did they have equity?
I guess they had not raised the money yet, but they were planning on making the movie regardless of who they had attached.
Yeah, they did have
as much money as
version.
they could manage to get. And they thought it was going to be like $100,000 film.
Yeah.
The more applicable scenario, I think, to that question is the person who sets out to raise $1 million, and that means there's going to be every single location that you want, and you're going to have your process trailer for your driving scenes, or whatever bells and whistles go towards building that budget up to $1 million. And then you go out and start raising money, and you end up raising $350, which is still a lot, especially for a first-time filmmaker, a lot of money, enough to go out and make a film. But you have to decide in terms of ethically communicating to the people who put that money up.
The people invested in $1 million movie, not a $350,000 movie.
Exactly. We could go make a C+ version of what we pitched you, or what I usually tell people is like, look, that's real money if you've raised that much, and you've probably raised it from people who really believe in you as a filmmaker or a filmmaking team. So go back and be honest with them, offer them their money back. Chances are they consider it spent. And anybody who really is in a hurry to get it back, you don't want to be in business with anyway. And then tell them, look, we are going to take longer to try to raise the rest of this, or we have this other project we're super excited about. It's our tone of voice, and it's smaller, but we think we can knock it out of the park for $350. So you sort of recalibrate. And I think that's a smart way to go about that scenario, where you sort of are aiming for one level and maybe fall a little bit short. But you always have to be honest with the people who've put in, because you may be making, I mean, I'm in my 50s now and I'm still making movies this way. So you might be making movies this way for a long time. And the single most important thing I would try to get across to anybody listening is, if you're going to raise money from other people for these high risk passion projects, then you've got to be honest with them about the risks involved. And because the idea is, if they invest at an appropriate level, knowing the risks and believing in you and your project, they'll be repeat customers because they won't feel swindled. What a lot of people do is fall into that trap where they oversell either the potential return or how big the movie's going to be or who's going to be in it. the money gets spent and everyone's disappointed because not only do you potentially not make your money back, but you've misled people on the realities of how difficult these things are before they even start. And most people really, this is sort of a duh type thing, but you'd be shocked how many people appreciate honesty. Will it cause some people to walk away immediately? Yes. But the people that don't are like, oh, so, what's your plan B if this doesn't work out? And, you need to go through and rehearse a lot of these questions, but it's a lot of people made money by being entrepreneurs, and most entrepreneurs, even the famous ones, didn't hit it out of the park on their first time. It's just no one talks about those because it's the one that blew them up that everyone writes about.
Well, what I think is interesting about this thought, Stu, is that another way of saying it is that there's really one right answer, or one right number for this movie. If you want to hit it out of the park and it's an expensive idea, it's an expensive movie. If it's a great idea that costs $50,000, that's a horse of a different color. But like, don't sell someone on something that you can't hit out of the park, basically. But maybe come up with a cheaper idea.
I think the 15, 20 years ago when I was first getting started, there was sort of okay, here's the shoot it on 35 budget, and here's the shoot it on crappy digital budget, and it's the same script. But yeah, I think you're exactly right. And there's some nuance in there. Obviously, if you had $1 million budget and you raised 900, chances are good you can figure out a way to get to the finish line on that in a responsible way. But if it's $1 million movie and you raise, like I said, 350, then it's probably time to check yourself.
Well, what about the idea of raising enough money for production and hoping, figuring
out post
that you'll be able to raise that money once people see how freaking awesome Kathy Griffin is in that one scene that she's barely in?
Yeah. So this is a softball question for me because I have a very firm and direct answer, which is especially if you're a first timer, if you got some experience or you're a first timer and you have some experienced people around you, I might bend on this a little bit, but please, please, please raise everything you need to finish your film before you start, because most of these things lose money. And the biggest reason why they do is because they're undercapitalized. And probably the biggest reason they are undercapitalized is exactly the scenario you described. It's like, hey, we've got enough to get it in the can, let's go. Because I read this article in Filmmaker last year about this guy who won Sundance. I'm being
right.
hypothetical.
He did his
here.
audio mix after he got into Sundance.
He mortgaged his house, like he did everything, and just figured out, and then he raised the rest of the money once they got in, which is.
And Robert Rodriguez never did anything again since.
Well, exactly. Again, exceptions to every rule, but nobody writes about all the train wrecks that didn't get in. There's 4,000 features that don't get into Sundance every year, and I guarantee you a significant percentage of those probably will never see the light of day because they're not finished. They've sent work, which is another sort of crazy move to do, is like something's incredibly competitive, and if you don't know anybody on the programming committee and you're sending in something that's not your best effort, like, oh, it's a rough cut that we threw together 3 weeks after we finished shooting, they're going to love it. Yeah, maybe. There are, just like saying you're going to make money in this business, there's always examples of outliers you can hang your hat on. But
that's actually really interesting. It's the most obvious advice I think we've ever heard, but I've never heard anyone say it, which is, it's better to not submit a work in progress.
Again, yeah, because it's everyone gets in a hurry. That's sort of the big moral of the story. You're like, oh, we've raised some money, let's go shoot. Oh, we've got
the Tribeca deadline is April, let's do this or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, and we wrapped on March 25th. It's like, it makes no sense. It's like, pick a different festival,
Sure. Or if Sundance is the one, if you made a Sundance movie and then wait a year, right?
I mean, I told the investors we're submitting to Sundance. That's how we got the money.
Yeah, and look, that might be true, right? That's okay. It does.
But yeah, wait a year, and then you can really develop a wonderfully coherent strategy of how to make the best possible first impression.
It's easy to underestimate how much better your movie gets with every incremental step.
So says the guy who just mixed something. So exactly.
I laughed at jokes for the first time tonight. I've been looking at this movie for a year straight, and it's like, oh, right, that's a little more audible that joke is stronger. And that happens in every single step. You know what I mean?
Yeah, Matt loves loud jokes.
Yeah. Or I'm going deaf, one of the two.
This idea of above the line and below the line, and what Matt said, that there is a number for every movie, but that number really is a below the line movie, right? When someone says you actually need $350,000 or you need $1 million to make this movie, this is unrelated to talent, a director, a fancy person, sales, right? Like these people that are kind of taking more money to give your movie more value.
Costs. There are hard costs, and then there are flexible costs that maybe, create more value.
And in terms of in that scenario, you're paying your SAG-cast scale at whatever contract level you're at. You're not working most likely with a DGA or WGA director or writer. So, and they likely have a huge stake in the back end because they're going to work for well below what their going rate might be. So yeah, I think you're exactly right. We're talking not so much about just a below the line number, but a below the line number plus an above the line where nobody's being compensated aggressively because everybody's kind of in it to win it. And all those above the line folks understand that and you got to play the back end game a little bit, but all those above the line folks understand that you take the hit on this one because hopefully it sets you up to do the next one.
Right. So when you're talking about a budget and you say it's a $2 million movie because we're going to give $1 million to Courtney Cox and $1 million for the production, that's not how you should think about it. You should think we need $1 million to make this movie, and then this name adds this value to the movie, so this is how much we can pay them, right?
Yeah, and I got pitched a project, I think 3 or 4 years ago, where I got pitched it multiple times, and this movie ended up getting made. But at a much different. It was originally pitched to us as a $4 million film, and I think John Cusack was going to get like $1.5 million for 3 days of work or something like that. And it was all this sort of house of cards. And this project came to us from very respectable sources, but it was like, if we get Cusack in this small role or on the poster, I would presume, then we wipe out Asia in terms of pre-sales, which I think would more than pay for his salary. Now, he ended up not being in the movie, and the movie became like a $1.5 million thriller at that point. So, and we actually got involved in that a little bit, but so I'll leave it to your listeners to do the Tetris on our website to figure out which movie I'm talking about. But looking at that from the other perspective, it gets back to that point we made earlier, which is if somebody comes in late in the game who is literally a game changer, then I think you can either go back to your investor pool, or suddenly you're going to get those production companies that weren't interested in your little indie because no one of note was in it. Well, now you have equity, which no one wants to spend their own money. So if you raised $1 million and now you have an actor who will do the lead role for an extra $1 million, that's a really compelling package I think you can take around town. And I don't think any of your core investors would mind. This gets tricky, but usually in a scenario like that, the people who put the equity in will end up taking a back seat to whoever comes in later to close it out. But
expand upon that a little bit, though, Stu, because I think that isn't a complicated and sort of interesting thing.
It seems unfair in a way.
It totally seems unfair.
Yeah, it dilutes their shares, right? And also they're lower in the waterfall, right? So walk us through that a little bit.
Like the last in, first out, right?
Worse than dilution, it is exactly what you said, Matt. I think both of you said it. It pushes you further down the food chain. So you could be in a scenario where your equity investors put up $1 million, somebody comes in and loans the project $1 million, but since they're a creditor, they're the first to recoup. So the selling point to your investors is like, hey, we still own the whole thing. But then the movie only goes out and grosses $1.5 million, or nets out $1.5 million after all the bills are paid. And so the person who loaned gets their loan back plus some interest, and the equity investors who made the whole thing happen to begin with get half their money back. And if that strikes you as unfair or immoral or wrong, I totally agree with you. But it's how a lot of these things get made. Is you start with equity, and that serves as collateral to borrow money. And the hope is that the project makes enough money to clear all the hurdles and pay everybody back in the waterfall. But there's definitely a risk there. I do think in many respects it might sound unfair But if you were to tell anybody who's got, if you told me this, for example, like the difference is we're going to make a $2 million film I own a big chunk of, with a very no-name cast or up-and-comers or whatever a nice thing to say is about people who don't translate to I won't even say box office anymore, just downloads or streams, versus a $4 million movie where I take a deeper place in the waterfall, but suddenly we've got a much bigger director or somebody who creates a lot of value for the thing. Like that may be a risk proposition that if it's explained properly to savvy equity investors, they're open to taking. As the saying goes, it's like, I don't know if this is perfectly applicable, but somebody said this at a seminar I attended years ago, and I love it because it applies to so many different types of deals. But that's simply like a slice of the watermelon is bigger than the entire grape. And so you sometimes have to think like, and I think that's why, the gigantic movies that get made, I have a friend of mine who's shooting a movie overseas right now, and it's a 50-day shoot. It's a $20 million movie. And I'm sure if they go over a day or two, they will spend the money. They're pot committed at that point. So it's the same thing with what the studios spend on marketing films. It's like it all becomes about what can we do to recoup this massive investment. And if we have to spend more on advertising to better our chances, we'll do that. So anyway, that's a little bit of a...
Sounds like the business I would like to be in. I would like...
Well, wouldn't we all? Because on the bigger movies, everyone's paycheck's bigger, and
sure.
And it's like, oh, let's shoot 2 more days. Great, that's 2 more days for me to work.
Sign me up.
So,
yeah.
Well, my last budget question is, from your experience, the films you've been involved in or the filmmakers what's the most money a first-time filmmaker has gotten for their first movie?
And let's even, I'm going to plus it and say there's the first-time filmmaker who's done nothing versus the first-time filmmaker who it's like, that maybe they were a DP, they had a short, they've got it's not impressive by studio standards, but they're not totally green.
I don't know if I can, obviously I will answer this question, but you may come back to me with some more qualifiers. First off, I don't think I've ever worked with anybody who's never made anything before. Now, first-time feature directors, I've worked with a lot of them, but all of them have done, at least shorts before, so you sort of know what you're getting into.
What's the smallest body of work you've worked with? Like just a great thesis?
Like True Adolescence, for example, which was Craig Johnson's first film, and he's gone on, I think he's on his 5th or 6th feature now, and he's directed a lot of episodic stuff. That was a project I joined as a producer after the train had left the station. And I don't know that I had seen any of Craig's prior work. And True Adolescence started off as his thesis at NYU and morphed into this feature because he had this sort of force of nature producer behind him named Thomas Woodrow, who like got 1,600 on his SATs, like remarkably smart guy. That's back when 1,600 was the highest you could get. I don't know. I think the numbers have changed. But Tom went to Yale, was a great guy, and these guys hooked up at NYU grad school. And I'm not sure how they found, I think it might have been because I'd done a podcast a million years ago, but it was, but I got involved with them. And that movie was critically acclaimed. It got sold. It did not sell for anywhere near what it cost. But that movie is like such a home run by every other metric. It is how the movie Hump Day got made, and I can't remember what. I think there was one film that Lynn and Mark did before Hump Day. Lynn Shelton was our still photographer on that. She took that gig because she wanted to meet Duplass. And anyway, the gaffer on that film is now a big time DP. I'm going to forget his name, but anyway, it's like that movie has the most insane family tree, and I'm on it too. I don't know that I've got quite the body of work as some of those other folks, but if you invested in that and didn't get your money back, I don't think you're looking at that as like, gosh, I lost $5,000. I think you're looking at, I invested in Craig's first feature, and now he's done 7 more.
And his next movie is The Skeleton Twins.
Yeah, after that, and a few people came along for the ride on that one, including Jenny Lee, who was the editor. So anyway, I'm tangenting a little bit, but that's a classic example of a film that I just think has paid so many dividends for everybody who worked on it. And if everybody invested in it for the right reasons, I didn't do the business plan for that film, but I did help raise some additional funds for it.
Well, so what was the budget on that, on True Adolescence?
I will ballpark that at around $500,000. The challenging thing on that for me was, as I said, hey, raise all your money first. They basically did, And well, they had enough to get into post, but there was some music that they really wanted. They're like, they did the thing where one of the actors, I think it's Iron Man, he sings it on camera, because it's like about they're lost in the woods and he's trying to motivate himself. So we had to hunt down the rights to that. There were some other post costs. So they had enough to get into post, but they certainly didn't have enough to finish. And again, this was one, I give this lecture all the time, as you all know. And I think we were at the Nashville Film Festival years ago, and Craig came up to me after he sat through the lecture, and he's like, I just want you to know that I will never, ever make a movie like this again. Like, I'm grateful that you were on the ride for this. He's like, but I totally agree. Because anybody, it's one thing if you've never done it and you hear me preach about raising all the money first before you shoot. If anyone out there has done this where you're undercapitalized and you're scrambling for finishing funds, which almost invariably, by the way, also come in senior to those early investors, who almost always are people or have some sort of connection to. No one wants to do that. It's a miserable experience to either have to go back to the people who've already bet on you and ask for more, or once they say no, I'm tapped out, having to go raise money from people that are like, yeah, I'll do it, but I want to be last in, first out. To answer your question specifically about what project was a first-time director or highest budget and best return, probably Plus One. And those guys had done a lot of stuff before, but it was their first feature. It's a home run movie in so many ways. I mean, their careers have taken off, the casts have taken off, and the movie's paid for itself. So that's.
And what was that budget?
That was a great movie, around $1 million. I want to say it was either right under or right over.
Yeah, I love that movie. Because you do hear about a lot of like these people that are straight out of film school and they've got a project and they're like, yeah, it's a $3 to $5 million, and you're like, well, you're never gonna get that unless you attach someone very famous or have some.
And when you say attach someone very famous, you really mean like went to high school with someone who got famous,
or got a studio attached, like won the Nichols, and
sure.
Well, and that's a tough lesson to learn too, right? Because we've all been in the business long enough. We all have great friends who are actors, many of whom are successful working actors. They're not necessarily famous, but I think really your objective should be, when you're casting a project early in your career, is just get the best possible actor you can, not the most famous. There's so many actors out there who are really great and never get the opportunity. And so that's why that's how people break. You give people who are really good an opportunity. It doesn't matter if they're 18 or 58. The challenge is when you're like, oh, what we're going to do is spend an extra $65,000 to bring this person in who we've all heard of for 4 days or 3 weeks or whatever on a Schedule F deal, who's not going to make the movie appreciably, certainly not necessarily better. They may not make it worse, but it's a paycheck for them. And it's not necessarily going to make your film stand out anymore at AFM or to a potential distributor. And in some cases, it can kind of wreck the movie if you put somebody too recognizable in with a bunch of people who aren't that recognizable, because you're like, oh, that's so like Iron Abbey's a movie I worked on years ago. I would put that right up there with Plus One as a just fantastically executed and really funny romantic comedy. I don't know if you all have seen that one or not, but highly recommend it. It's like before Woody Allen became tarnished, if you just look at him as a filmmaker, and in theory, a lot of people respect him still as a filmmaker. This is like a female's take on dating with a lot of it's a very New York film. It's a very Jewish film. It's very fun. And it's really good. But we could not sell that thing to save our lives. I was not terribly involved with that process. Finally got Magnolia to pick it up, but not nearly. The filmmaking team had made the movie Kissing Jessica Stein a couple of years previously and sold that to Searchlight for well more than that cost. And Iron Abbey's a fantastic movie, but it suffers a little bit from stunt casting because there's like 3 or 4 Jason Alexander's in it, and he's actually great in it. They're all great in it, but there's a few people who just pop up for like one scene. I think Chris Parnell and Daryl Hammond are both in it, and it's sort of like they're hilarious, but they also bump a little bit because you're like,
oh, you're breaking the world that you're creating.
Yeah, and Plus One does, Beck Bennett's in Plus One, so it's like there's a little bit of disassociation there, but he's actually playing a pretty straight character. Like, he's not trying to be funny. He's the groom in the very first wedding, and has a very heartfelt scene at the end. So at least in that instance, they're not trying to be in any way comical per se. So anyway,
Right. Yeah, that's really interesting.
the point being is, like, below a certain budget level, the other thing is that when you have those actors who haven't broken yet, and they put their time in, again, they may be successful working actors because of commercials or guest roles on episodic or whatever. Those people really want to be there. And over a 4-week shoot where your food's probably B minus, B plus, you might be in the middle of nowhere. Like, you want that community theater vibe. You want people who are just like, this is awesome.
Yeah.
Like, what are we shooting
love
today?
Domino's pizza.
Yeah.
I love the double cheese. I have another question that I feel like Matt and I kind of are on different sides of it. Actually, I don't know, Matt. You correct me if I'm wrong, but you mentioned about True Adolescence. This is a movie that basically launched the career of this director. A lot of other people. Mark Duplass was in it. Was on his path. Did not make its money back, but everyone that invested in it is stoked because they started this fire.
I don't know everyone who invested in it, so I can't say that definitively.
Okay,
but I would be shocked if anyone feels negatively about that film.
Right.
There might be one or two people, because for reasons not related to this conversation, but I won't get into. But anybody who just put in a little bit, it's like, first off, again, if you're selling it the right way, no one has the expectation of getting rich. A frigging 2x return in a film is a home run.
Yeah.
So,
but I guess my point is that this is a movie that did not make its money back, but launched careers. And I think a lot of times, like, I think launching a career, like, if I made a movie that launched a career, whether it's my career or some people, the cast or something, sometimes I look at that as more valuable. Like, if you made a movie that won Sundance but lost a ton of money, versus if you made a horror film that for $100,000 and made $1 million,
or $150,000, right?
I think that's the better analogy, right?
Yeah, if you made $1 million off of $100,000, everyone would be stoked. But like making a good amount of money, but not an astronomical amount. But right. I think I know where you're headed, Oren.
Right? Does that make you, as the filmmaker, more marketable? Like, I guess for me, if I had the option of making a money-losing movie that would become famous, I'd take that over a money-making movie that no one's ever heard except for the super niche audience somewhere. What's your take on that?
Well, it sounds like you're asking from the filmmaker's perspective, and so if we look at just the writer-director,
or even as an investor, like, wouldn't you be, if you see two people, this she made a $100,000 horror film, made $150,000 back, and then this other director, she made a $500,000 film that made $100,000 back, but it won Sundance Grand Jury Prize. Who do you invest in for their next film?
I would say probably both. I think.
What a lovely answer, Stu. That's great.
Well, thank you. I'm running for office, so I'll try my best to appeal to everybody.
Sure.
But you could probably throw a third scenario in there where, let's say, that $500,000 film doesn't win Sundance, and that maybe the director was difficult to deal with. The movie doesn't make its money back, but it gets into Sundance, and it's kind of like, it's not an ideal experience. So that's where you would probably say, okay, I didn't make my money back. I didn't have the best time. We didn't win. Maybe you don't get into Sundance. Maybe you play a lesser festival. So I think that scenario is one where you could certainly make that if the movie's good, you make that a positive experience by treating everybody with respect, showing them a good time. Maybe you don't play a single festival. You just throw a hell of a private premiere. That alone can get people excited. You put a red carpet out in front of a theater, and people who've never gotten to experience that before, especially once you get out, or you do it in LA, but you do it in smaller towns too. It's all about, I talk a lot about psychic profit when I teach. And
I think I've stolen the thoroughbred metaphor on this show, actually.
Yeah. Well, there you go. Well,
but not everyone's listened to all,
totally
300
fine
episodes of the show.
And remember, a hack steals, an artist borrows. So you've simply borrowed, and with my blessing. But and I think we own the domain psychicprofit.com, and that probably now points to our educational content. Uh, but the whole idea is like, can you create an experience that people enjoyed so much they want to replicate? People are investing, whether it's a film or any other kind of startup. In most cases, they're investing disposable income, right? This is by definition money they don't need to survive. This is their money to instead of taking an extra trip to Vegas this year or buying an extra racehorse, they're going to bet on you. And if you can deliver, because most people racehorse deals don't work out, but if you can deliver something where the equivalent is, I got my picture taken in the winner's circle for a few brief moments, I thought we were going to win. We got a little money back, and I have got some killer stories to tell. And all of us only get so much time on the planet. So if part of your pitch is the time you spend with us is going to be time that you're grateful you did, that gap between what you put in, if there's a shortfall financially, if you can fill that in with experience, I think that's very real. Like, again, you could accuse me of being a little Pollyanna there, and there's an underbelly to that too, which is simply, or underside is probably a more attractive way to put it, which is you're not screwing people, right? You have gotten them to invest at an appropriate level where they're comfortable, where they're rooting for you sink or swim. And then if you get to one of those scenarios where it's either a modest profit financially or you make no money back, but it has had an impact on a lot of, especially of young people's careers, I totally agree with you. I think that's a home run. And that's the type of thing where people are like, how do I do that again? And it's very difficult to replicate. Not a lot of movies can be as successful, in my opinion, as True Adolescence was.
Well, so Matt warned me that we would be able to talk to you for 10 hours and just barely scratch the surface. But I have one kind of final question that's a little bit more about the end of the road for people that are trying to get their films financed with someone like you, which is, of all the pitches you've seen and projects you've seen that have come to you to either produce or to help finance, what materials should people come to you with? Like what gets you excited about a project? Is it a script, the budget, the team? Like, what, if you had advice for people that are preparing to pitch their movies to people? And I know that there isn't a one answer that fits everything, but what's your advice?
So there's sort of two questions there. What would I tell somebody and what do I respond to? So what I would tell someone, whether you're looking to bring a project to us or anybody else, is do your homework. It is insanely easy to, there actually was this article, I think it was either the Times or the Wall Street Journal. I think it was just yesterday, but it was like how much hackers can learn from your social media profile. Like literally, because you get wished happy birthday. It's like, people are like, oh, did you go to the Georgetown game last night? Or,
yeah. I always ask my friends like what their mom's maiden name was. Like, happy birthday. What was your mom's original last name?
But point being is, like, you don't have to do, we have an expression in our classrooms called GTS, which is Google that shit. When somebody asks a really dumb question, which is like, what kind of movies does Lunacy make anyway? And I'm like, why don't you go to our friggin' website? And you can see we sort of have everything under the rainbow. So do your homework no matter who you're going to go pitch, because it will help you. It'll help you narrow down your list of who you're going to pitch. And it will also help you in the room to say, we thought this would appeal to you if you get in the room. Like, this would appeal to you because, like, we loved this. We loved +1 or whatever. In terms of what we're looking for right now, to be candid, it's like we're pretty lean. So we're not on the hunt for stuff. We're really focused on things we're developing. But as I said earlier, we have this no assholes policy. So if we read something we love and we still somebody reaches out to us and says, hey, can you read this? Most likely,
literally just the script. They just give you a PDF of a script without a lookbook or a pitch deck or attachments or anything.
That's how it starts, right? They pitch us on something. But again, if someone knows how to, like, here's another thing. If you send me a opening email that's like 6 paragraphs, I'm like, doink. Like, that's just, keep it brief, keep it specific. Tell me why you're reaching. Like, I get a lot of people reaching out to me who are like, I'm from Kentucky and I'm a filmmaker. I want to make a film there. Your work's inspired me. You say that to me, I'm hooked. Like, I will read that script. Even if it ends up being awful, I'll read it because I've got a soft spot for that. So, but we're more than just a Kentucky company. But yeah, but know how the game's playing. Or it's like, if the script is good and it's accompanied by stunning visuals that are really in a really thoughtful lookbook, like you get one chance to make a first impression and you get one chance to basically make a second impression. And then after that, if you're great in the room, it's like, okay, we're not really looking to expand right now, but how do we work with this person? Because we love the material, we think they're great, and everything about them screams like we want to be on that train. So it's really about just taking it super seriously, and also like dating, you're not going to get along with everybody. So some meetings will be duds, and you cross those off your list and you move on to somebody who actually likes you.
Yeah. Have you ever taken up a project off of a short and like a treatment or a proof of concept or something that's not just like a 110-page script?
Yeah, I'd say like this one project a couple of years ago. We
can't
did not
say
end
yes to the questions like that to Oren. That's all he wants to hear.
Like, I don't want to write a script. I'm going to make a 3-minute sizzle.
Oren would much rather make a short than write
a cool
script.
deck.
Well,
I'm giving him a hard time.
These guys had a good script. This is the script we almost got involved with the two young filmmakers who probably will go on to great things. But we didn't jive with them on a couple of places where we thought we could help them. And but part of what hooked us was they had this amazing short. They had a really good script that we, we're in the development business. So when we see a great script, there's always ways it can be made a little bit better or more producible for the number. But the script, the short that they did, which was not a sizzle piece per se, it was just something that was sort of in sync genre wise with the feature, which if anybody is contemplating going that route, I would much more rather see a short that has nothing to do with the feature, but demonstrates capabilities that should
tone.
Yeah, tonally consistent and maybe scope consistent if that's possible, rather than saying, hey, here's a scene from my feature with these people that we never intend to put in it.
That is a good tip, because I do think we hear that a lot. I mean, there's like the Whiplash story, but that, there's a few stories we've heard, but not many of people filming one scene and then saying, like, getting their movie made off of that.
Or even, shooting a sizzle that's consistent with the tone. I think it's easier said than done. Trailers are really, really hard to shoot because, like, a trailer is just the best parts of a movie, right? So you kind of have to shoot the whole movie before you can cut the trailer. But I love the idea of a tonally consistent short that maybe is self-contained, is more about, is a complete story basically, rather than
you could even like we're working on a project now where and again, there's exceptions to every rule, so you sort of take this all with a grain of salt, but in that vein, I think it's an interesting idea to do. We had one project like this that fell apart for the pandemic. We're working on another one now where it's like we're going to make a short to try several things. One is to figure out exactly what this is, kind of like a cross-genre picture. So we want to make sure we can nail the tone. But we also are trying to do something that's from the same world. So think it's not quite a prequel, but there's like one character that kind of insignificant character in the feature that has a big role in this short, and it's all part of their backstory. But you don't need it. So it's sort of like if we execute it, we have this little extra asset that maybe that ends up on the Blu-ray or somewhere online. We leak it. If we kill it, but if we do a crappy job, then it's just us sort of putting on training wheels to say, can we do this blending of genres successfully? And we learn from it, and nobody ever sees it.
That's great.
So you mentioned a handful of things of like what to say in a pitch, right? Like you said, personal connection, being humble. They were hinting at a few things. Are there things that you see that are kind of easy, quick no's? Not that you're dismissive, but you know what I mean. Like things that maybe you had mentioned that, like, putting in.
If someone emails you with 6 paragraphs of information, then you probably won't read it.
That's a good one. I will say we have sort of this. There was this legendary meeting that we had. My Harris McCabe, who's our head of development, and I guarantee you, he would, if I told him, you remember the notes meeting, and he would be able to tell you exactly what happened. He's got a better memory than I do. But we literally had, I think it was 2 in this film. I don't think ever got made. But it's like when you're in the room, be receptive to notes. If you're getting them from people who are your potential partners, whether it's creative producing or because it's just a conversation. But these guys just were like, oh yeah, that's, I respect your. I don't even know if they said respect your opinion. It was just like, no, we're not going to do that. That's not the film we want to make. And we're like, oh, okay, that's really good to know, because now you're making a movie we don't want to make, because like you have like a C plus here, and we think we're the guys to help you make it an A, and so and it would have taken very little effort. And there was one producer in the room who was a dear friend of ours who was just like this when the writer directors were saying this, and it takes so little. And this is even more true on like the agency and the industry side. Like you just have to play that improv game of yes and, right? It's like, even if you totally disagree with the note, you've got to learn the art of diplomacy with it. So anyway, it doesn't mean you're a kiss ass, but the idea is get to the next meeting. As soon as you're in one, make the next one happen. So that's a big one. I think I'm huge on thank you notes. So anybody who we give time or effort to, whether it's, sometimes we'll just send coverage to somebody and say, hey, it's not for us, but we'll send you a report. If we get a thank you note back, like we at least, that person goes in the like, gosh, decent person file, and maybe there's another script they want us to read in 2 years. That door remains open because they were respectful. And then I don't know if I've got any other big don'ts. There's like, don't pay for a letter of intent. Don't
Hold
ever
on.
take money.
That's a good one. Let's talk about that. So you said don't pay for a letter of intent. Does that mean you were against letters of intent in general?
No, I think letters of intent can work. I think letters of interest can work. It's like anything that is properly represented. Like, hey, I'm the agent for Kevin Costner, and Kevin has read this script and is potentially interested in this, like, older, whatever role he would play, third supporting lead or something. And that makes no sense, but you know what I mean. I'm now 2 bourbons in, but it's like, what you don't want to do is pay that agent or that actor $10,000 for that letter, because that letter is invariably going to say it is contingent on availability. It's contingent on us agreeing on a rate. It's contingent on, like, my entire entourage getting producing credits. It'll have some sort of BS in there. Because most people are like, hey, yeah, we like this material. You're welcome to represent that we're interested, pending working out details. So I think if you call it that, then that's fine. But you don't, and you also don't want to attach anybody who doesn't matter. So it's like, hey, my best friend's an actor and he's done a couple of guest spots on this show. I love him. I think he'd be great for this. But I'm not going to attach him because he'll do it no matter what, because he's my friend. And I hope he does it. But frankly, if somebody famous comes along that can make the movie better, I'll get him on the next one, or I'll give him another role.
Yeah, friends, nobody needs them. Well, on that note, Stu, this has been awesome. Thanks so much. And and I know people can find out more about you and your movies on a little website I go to called imdb.com. But also they can find out more about your educational program at LunacyU.
LunacyU.com, and then lunacyproductions.com is where all our movie stuff is. And the 2 sites are pretty connected. So you get to one, you should be able to find the other.
Cool. Are you guys on social media too?
Oh, yeah. Lunacy Prods on social, LunacyU on social, Stu Pollard on social. So we have with Bourbonality, we have way too many social handles. So, but no, I appreciate y'all having me. It's a lot of fun. I hope we can do it again sometime in person. And,
no doubt. Well, before we let you go, Stu, we do have a thing called Unpaid Endorsements. Can you hang out and endorse with us?
Please.
Unpaid Endorsements. All right. So, Stu, this is in honor of you, actually. This is Filmmakers and Financing, Business Plans for Independence by Louise Levinson, who I think you turned me onto this book in your class a couple of years ago. But it is the book on writing film financing, basically, writing business plans.
Completely agree. And it kind of came full circle with me with Louise many, many years ago. But I think I reached out to her and just told her, I may have just thanked her for writing the book, because it helped me so much write my first business plan. This is back in like 2002 or 3. Anyway, we ended up having a cup of coffee and getting to know each other a little bit. At one point, I had a cover quote in one of the editions of her book. But yeah, there's a zillion books on film financing out there, and I just think hers is so just to the point. It's got some good samples in there, and it doesn't try to do too much. So I think that's a great primer for anybody who's trying to write a business plan. For the class I teach on business plans, that would be the text I recommend.
Perfect. Well, and it's also, I find it to be readable, and also they update it relatively frequently, so it's not like you're reading stuff that's like from
I think she's
1998 or whatever.
I think she's on her 9th or 10th edition of that thing, which is amazing. I mean, how many people can say that?
Yeah, that's pretty wild. This is the 8th edition. I think this one's a little old. But so the it keeps getting updated. There's pertinent information. So filmmakers and financing, business plans for independence is my unpaid endorsement.
So I recently uploaded a video to YouTube, and it's been a little while since I've done that. And have you, Matt, ever dealt with captions like on a video in Premiere?
I have. Yes, I have. Yeah. I'm finishing a film, as we talk about all the time.
So I guess for a feature, it's probably pretty easy to hire a company to do it. But I uploaded a minute-long video, and someone on Facebook, I have a lot of deaf people that I'm friends with on Facebook on account of me making a movie with a bunch of deaf actors. And someone was like, "Why are there no captions?" Like, I'm sure this video is funny, but I can't tell what anyone's saying. And I was like, dope. And I haven't done captions in Premiere forever, like probably since I made my movie in like 2010 or whatever. But now the caption tools in Premiere are so amazing. So if anyone is ever like using the text tool and trying to time text on top of their video and do all sorts of weird things, like stop doing that right now. And you can add a new caption track in Premiere. You can actually add multiple caption tracks in different languages, and you can burn them into your video. You can export them as separate SRT files, and even on YouTube, you can upload them as a separate file. And I just thought the whole process was so pleasant, because I know YouTube will auto-generate captions, but part of being good at writing captions, especially for comedy, is to time them right, to not give away punchlines like a few seconds before they need to be given away and whatnot. And I read this whole BBC guide on good, best practices for captioning yesterday. So, I don't know. I just got really excited by captions in Adobe Premiere.
That's cool, man.
If you upload something to YouTube, you should caption it.
Did you ever think about doing the thing? I used to do this in my web series days, where I'd have it auto transcribe from YouTube and then suck down that SRT file and then fix it and then re-upload it. Oh. So it gets you kind of like, 70% of the way there, basically.
No, that's a really great idea.
So I'll endorse two things unsolicited. One relevant to our conversation, and one that impacted our conversation. The one that's relevant to our conversation is moo.com. They are an excellent online. They make the best on-demand business cards out there. I don't have an example with me. One of the things we do when we go to festivals or we finish a movie or whatever is we turn the movie poster into a business card and put our contact information on the back. So, and Moo will let you do, I think, up to like 50 different images on the A side of the card, and your contact information is on the back. So as soon as you've made a couple of films, you can have a variety pack. And they do lots of cool, they do stickers and stationery, thank you notes I mentioned earlier. So anyway, I can't speak highly enough about how nice they are. And if they screw up, they will literally send you replacements if you tell them how they screwed up. And of course, you can keep all the originals. And as indie filmmakers, it's like, it's not that screwed up. Send that to the people who aren't important. Get the same message for us. And the endorsement that impacted the conversation is a really amazing company. I believe they're based in Vermont, called wintersmiths.com. I guess I can show you guys, but they make these. You probably have seen these if you're a bourbon drinker, but so these ice spheres. Now, you can buy these molds like at Williams-Sonoma that will make you really cloudy ones, but Wintersmiths has sort of cornered the market on these contraptions that you fill with water. They're these molds, but all the gunk drops to the bottom, so the spheres form on top. This thing's maybe like $50, and it is so killer. It makes the clearest spheres you've ever seen, and it's totally cost effective, and it's my go-to Christmas gift. Every year for people who love cocktails.
Yeah,
that's
cool.
A very good one.
Yeah, super cool.
Two good ones. I'm really into the smooth stuff.
wintersmiths.com.
Cool.
Awesome, Stu. Well, thanks so much for joining us. If you want to learn about all of the stuff that we talked about, including our unpaid endorsements, you can go to justshootitpod.com, or you can follow us across all social media at justshootitpod, or me at Mr. Matt Enlow.
You can also email us, justshootitpod@gmail.com. We love to hear from you. Or give us a voicemail. We actually got a voicemail recently. 1-262-SHOOT-1. We love to hear your voices. You hear ours all the time, and I think you owe it to us. Anyway, I'm on social media. I'm at OKaplan on Instagram. I'm at SmiteyPyleg on Twitter. Our episode was edited by Sarah Weirda. Our social media maestro is Derek Aiello. Some consulting producing by Ali Kornfeld. And the music you're listening to is from the Free Music Archive and the artist Jahzzar. And we'll catch you next time. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.